My name is Lindsey Fitzharris, and this is the trailer to my upcoming book, The Butchering Art, which is all about the brutal and bloody world of Victorian surgery. Enjoy!
The wound has soured. I'm going to cut it off.
There you are. Aren't you coming?
He died.
Who?
The docker we were operating upon last night. He died half an hour ago.
Yeah, well, that ain't really unusual, Joseph.
No, that's the thing of it, isn't it? It's odd, don't you think? Given the body's remarkable inclination to heal itself, you don't think it's odd? Why, when we give it the opportunity, we take away disease, we afford it the chance to grow strong again, why do they die?
Trauma, Joseph.
No, not in so many. Too many are dying. These are strong men, James. Men who lead harder lives than you or I could tolerate. We operate on shipbuilders, labourers, farriers, the toughest breeds in the land. No, there's more to this than trauma. There has to be more to it than that. Something hidden from our understanding.
What's the supernatural then? Gods? Monsters? I don't know. Take your pick. Hey, we might have to burn the hospital down from time to time. Come on, I don't want to be late.
Monsters. Monsters.
Mister! Come on!
We knew we were in contact with genius. We felt we were helping in the making of history. And that all things were becoming new.
Yay! Everybody survived it.
We did. Hoping it didn't scare anybody off. I know, I love it. This needs to be a movie, this trailer. And that was definitely a cameo I saw there at the end.
I know. My friend Alex, who directed it, he was like, we need to have you. We had no budget. We just were kind of taking our chances, but it turned out brilliantly. And we filmed a lot of that in the old operating theater in London, which if you ever get to London, it's the second oldest in the world. It's an amazing museum. But surprisingly, they wouldn't let us throw around fake blood. So the first scene we actually had to recreate and rebuild the set elsewhere so that we could do all the gory stuff that we wanted to do.
This book was disgusting and barbaric. I love it.
I know.
perfect little morbid. This is like, so welcome everybody. Hello to the Morbidly Curious Book Club. I'm Patricia. I'm the owner and host. You can call me Patches, of course, and we discuss all things morbid, only nonfiction books at the end of every month. I really hope that if you are here, you've been here before, because that was quite the introduction if you have not. So, of course, in July, we read The Butchering Art by Lindsey Fitzharris, Joseph Lister's quest to transform the grisly world of Victorian medicine. And I gotta say, this book is like the epitome of why the Morbidly Curious Book Club exists. This is the perfect segue, I think, if you're trying to get into some morbid nonfiction. It's just a fantastic book, and I cannot wait to discuss this with you guys. But of course, this is a very special live show because we are joined by the author, Lindsey Fitzharris. Thank you so much for being here with us. Even though you're stuck in the United States right now, it's okay.
Yes.
You get to hang out with morbid people, so welcome.
I know, but
yes.
I found my people. Yeah. So just briefly, I was talking to Patricia because initially I said I couldn't do the podcast because I'm usually in the UK. I've lived there for 23 years, but recently was prevented from boarding a flight with my husband, who's British, because they said they had no record of me being a citizen. So I'm in my mom's basement. This is not my mom's basement. This is the virtual background of my office. I just thought I got to get that in. So my husband, Adrian, took a picture and make sure it looked kind of like, Dr. Fitzharris's office. But it's great to be here. So I'm kind of on the time zone. I think you guys are East Coast and I'm in Chicago at the moment. So.
Yes, and everybody's saying hello. Thank you for being here. We love it.
Oh, Judy Melanie. I love Judy. Oh, have you ever read her book, Working Stiff? Fantastic.
Oh, I've had it for years. Hi, Judy.
So
good.
Gosh, yeah, hello. She's amazing, and she also writes fiction. She's great. I'm seeing a lot of people here that. Thanks, guys, for showing up. I love it. Julie, she says, I'm being bowed to in the trailer. Actually, fun fact, I was carrying all of Joseph Lister's publications. And so I'm passing the fake Lister in the trailer and I'm carrying all of his written works. And it was kind of a fun moment we had filming that. So
yes. Oh, I love it. I love these, I love little Easter eggs like that.
And TJ, yeah, of course. How could I forget TJ, who co-writes the books with her? I mean, they're both amazing. And actually, yes. Judy came onto my TV show, The Curious Life and Death of, and we had such good fun. I think it was difficult not to laugh, wasn't it, Judy? But she talked me through the virtual autopsies of some of the figures that we were looking at. And my friend Annabelle, Conjures Kitchen, she does these amazing creepy cakes. She's fantastic. She's out in LA. I know her stuff is incredible. She did my wedding cake when I got married at the Tower of London in 2017. So there's a lot of talent here tonight. So I'm so grateful to know all these wonderful people.
You guys are, this is Killer
Book Club. Yeah.
I love all the people that are coming together for this.
I know. I put out a thing on Blue Sky and I was like, I'm stuck here, guys. Come and say hello. So people are railing around this weird situation I'm in at the moment, but it's very good to be here. And I said, you guys could still say negative thing about the book. I always like to hear genuine feedback. I was listening to your recording about the FACEMAKER, and it was fascinating because somebody said, and I forget who it was, but they said, I knew nothing about the First World War. And I thought, girl, me too, because when I started writing that book, I was like, why did this war even start, right? Like, it's not a war that we learn about much in American schools. Right. So it was a learning experience for me.
So for those who, same also, by the way, Facebook, I have a couple things to say about that, but somebody did say they want to watch that again. So I put the link. It is on Facebook and YouTube. Instagram is a little bit finicky. I am live on Instagram. However, I cannot see your comments. I do have another tab open to try and like glance over at those from time to time, but it is much easier for me to see your comments if you're on Facebook or YouTube. So if that's easier for you, that would be great on our end. Yes, one of us, absolutely. So the FACEMAKER. So Lindsey, you're actually our first repeat author for the book club.
Oh, that's great.
We have another one coming up later this month, but we did read the FACEMAKER back in 2022, and I sang such high praises of that book as well, because it's such an interesting niche topic, and it is one of those that I pull fun facts from all the time. But Lindsey, thank you so much for being here. I'm also joined by some incredible Morbidly Curious book club members as well. Of course, some of these faces you've seen before, some of them you have not. Kimberly, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here, reigning from the West Coast. Hello. Hello. And then we've got Rachel. I absolutely am so happy to see your face finally. We've been talking online for like 5 years now at this point. I get to see you. Hello. Thank you for all you do. I did adjust your volume just a little bit, so I'm going to boost you back up here. But it does let me automatically adjust volume, but I do sometimes do it on my own. Alyssa, hello.
Hello.
Reading from Texas.
Yeah.
Hi, Tam.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being here. We do have some chapter heads here joining us, so I'm super excited to see you guys. I, of course, host some of the chapter meetings in the Charlotte kind of area. I do one in Charlotte, Belmont, and Mooresville, North Carolina. We've got Tam in Los Angeles, Alyssa in Texas, Rachel in Oklahoma, and Kimberly, you do attend the, what is it, the NorCal one?
Yeah, Sacramento area. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. I love it. So if you guys would like to join a chapter, of course, we'd love to have you here on the live shows, but if you would like to join a chapter, please do so on our website. I will fully admit I'm a bit behind on the chapter submissions. I need to get on that. I'm going to lean on Alyssa for that here soon when I actually compile a way that she can help me out, because your girl's doing a little bit too much. So, oh yes. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Hopefully I get to see you tomorrow. I will be in Mooresville tomorrow chatting about this book. And I'm going to probably bring some treats and cookies and stuff, because why not eat when we're talking about Victorian era medicine? Of course. So first of all, I do want to give a shout out. I put that packet together. That is on me. Give a shout out to the Patreon members. Thank you so much for your support. I always appreciate you. We, every Sunday, the last Sunday of the month, before and after the main live show that you're attending here, we do have meetings. So we have a fiction edition book club. So we just met at 5 o'clock Eastern time to discuss our July book, and then at 9 o'clock we did start adding a weird little romance book club within the Patreon. So if that is something that you would be interested in, I'm also going to share the link to that here. It is a good time. It is chaos, but it's a good time.
Like you didn't have enough work to take on. You've decided to create even more book clubs.
Yes, and there's actually another book club or a bookstore opening up in Statesville, in my hometown. And of course I messaged her too and was like, hey, can I host a chapter there? And Christopher's like, do you have time for that? Anyway, so I do hear like tapping noise. I can't figure out what exactly that is.
I hear it, yeah.
Yeah, I hear it too, but I don't.
Might be on your end, Rachel. I'm so sorry. I apologize. We keep having technical difficulties with your audio. And my Wi-Fi keeps going out. So if I've suddenly vanish or freeze making a dumb face, you know what happened.
Guys, I'm in my mom's basement, and yet got this thing sorted. Worked on it all day. I got the Ethernet cord, and yeah, it was crazy.
I love it. And of course, you do have to briefly tell us before we get into the questions what that thing is behind you, if you don't mind. Go ahead and tell us.
Yeah, so I was talking to Patricia on Instagram, and I said, oh, I can't Zoom from my office, but I figured it out to do the virtual background. So that is the Houdini box. It was the Houdini water torture chamber. And on my TV show, I did Houdini's death. And so this was the last trick he did, was in the water torture chamber. And when I was on set, I said, what's going to happen to this thing? And they were like, we're going to dismantle it, Lindsey. And I said, no, you aren't. You're going to send it to my house. So they sent it to my house. It didn't fit through the door. So I had to saw it in half, which was totally worth it. And I made it into a bookcase, and it was, I had to keep it. Annabelle, you'll remember coming onto set with Tom her husband who died recently, who actually I credit for saving my life. My friend Tom, he was an amazing magician, and I saw him on book tour in 2022, and he had brain cancer, and he said to me, never put any never put anything to the side if you think something's wrong. I got back to the UK, I found a lump in my breast, I was very busy, but I thought of Tom. I went in, the thing I felt was nothing, but they found a hidden breast cancer in me, and it was crazy. And so Tom really saved my life, and Tom came to visit me on the side as long as with Annabelle, and we got a great photo. And so I thought, I got to keep that. So when it didn't fit into my door, I said, we got to come up with a solution. The top of it comes off, by the way, and it's got shackles in it, where he would have been shackled upside down. And I was moving into this new house in this little English village, and I think people were like, who's moving in next? Like, what is this? Is it like a sex thing? Like, it was definitely like an introduction, this weird Americans moving into this small village, but totally worth it for the office aesthetic,
I love it. Yeah, I need some more weird stuff like that. I've got some things in my room that even Christopher was like, do we need that? And I'm always like, yes,
we always need. You always need it. Yeah, Tom Hopkins is asking how it works. So it would have had glass, and basically he would be shackled upside down, so his ankles would have been on the top, and he would have been in it, and he would have been like in a straight jacket, and then it would be filled with water, and then he'd have to get out of all of this and free himself. And I had a magician come on set, or an illusionist, I guess, is the word he used. And he told me how he would have done it. He said, I don't know if this is how Houdini did it, but basically there's like a latch that you have to really trust your assistant. Let's put it that way. That latch has to be pushed. And then it's still not easy because you still got to get out of everything, but that would allow him to free himself. And so that was the last trick he did. And then I think he was backstage and somebody punched him in the stomach, and he ended up dying of some kind of random appendicitis that it triggered. It was like the weirdest and stupidest death for a guy who like did all these death-defying things all the time. But that was what the episode was on. So
yeah, the appendicitis that would have taken me out a couple years.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it would.
Mine tried to rupture on me.
Fatal, right? Like, and you think about the 19th century, there was just no recourse, really. I don't think I would have made it past 5 or 6. I was a really sick child, and but people will say to me, oh, people only live to like 35. But the thing is that statistic always includes child mortality rates, which were very high. But if you got past childhood, like that kind of critical period, you did have a chance of living to a pretty good age. So that's not exactly accurate that, the average lifespan was 35.
Right. Well, I've got 4 more years, guys.
Yeah. I'm well past it now. So
yeah. Chris's 35th birthday was last Friday, so love it. I lost. Yeah, I was 2012, I think. I was super sick, and nobody believed me. And suddenly, like, I had to crawl in the hospital room on all 4s. And reading books like this, it makes me really happy that we had anesthesia, because
oh my
God, I could not imagine. Then I had a hysterectomy last year, similar surgery, laparoscopic. I could not fathom. I would love to hear the thoughts of this book, though. Let's go ahead and talk, Chris. I love that. Go ahead and go over overall thoughts and rating if you guys rate it. And I know I do need to clarify, because this has happened before, where typical ratings, I guess, on some of the more popular sites like Storygraph and Goodreads, it's out of 5. But Book Clubs, the app, is out of 10. So sometimes people are like, yeah, I gave it a 3. And we're like, oh, that's a pretty good rating. And then they'll like go on a spiel on how much they hated it. And we're like, oh, out of 10. I'm with you now.
Got it.
So please preface what you guys thought of
this
the book.
Isn't awkward at all, guys.
So go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and tell you I rated it 1 star. No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks.
This was a 5. This was a 5 for me. I was so entranced by it. I respected the amount of research, and I'm not just going to say this because you're sitting here, Lindsay. I really respected the amount of work that went into this. It was gruesome, and we've talked about it briefly over DMs and before we went live. I'm not super squeamish. However, certain parts of this did get to me ever so. You know what I just realized? My microphone was all the way over
Oh,
there.
wow. That's much
Oh,
better.
geez.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just so much excitement. You were eating that. What were you eating
I
before?
was
You
eating
were.
pulled pork.
That's right. You were eating pulled pork.
Pulled pork.
It's very kind of graphic, like thing to eat right before the butchering art. So
You know me. I gotta go big or go home. So sorry, friends. I'm here now. Okay, my apologies. 5 out of 5. I thought that the amount of research that went into it was great. I was just entranced the whole time. I found some parts to be super gruesome, which I always appreciate. I need to be shaken up every once in a while. That's why this book club is great, because it like gives you something to break up some of the crazy romantasy books that I've been reading lately. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that at 9 o'clock with the Patreon.
romantasy. This is like the whole new thing, right? This is like these authors are making so much money. I'm like, I need to get into like the
You
romantasy.
need to get into the romantasy genre, because I actually had a conversation about that with Maria Smilios and romance books and how they're the only things that's selling right now. But the more
I feel like nobody wants me in that. You know, I did an article for Penthouse once on the history of sex devices, and my husband, who's an illustrator, he illustrated. I'm sure we ruined every person who bought that copy of Penthouse. They're like, open it up, and there's this horrible history of sex devices. But I had fun. It was.
Now I need that. Now I need to read that.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy. It's like when people will introduce me at events and they'll say she wrote for the Wall Street Journal and the Lancet, and then I'm like, and Penthouse, you know.
Yeah.
That's the best one. But yeah, I love to ruin people's. Yeah, so if I get into romancy, like I could really throw in some graphic, horrible medical realities, and
Which we love. That's what we want.
yeah.
That's what we want here. I am going to skip over you, Lindsay. I'm assuming you would give this a 5, but we can go back to you here in a second. I'm also trying to treat, I told Lindsay beforehand too, I'm trying to treat her as just like another book club guest here, because I do have a million questions for you, but I'm going to save those for the podcast, and we'll discuss some nitty gritty stuff later, but I'll get back to you here in a second. Kimberly, if we had to rate it, do you rate books, overall thoughts? Are you squeamish? What did you take away from this?
This is definitely a 5 out of 5 for me. We all tab our books a little bit or write in them, and I think most of my tabs just say WTF.
Yes.
On most of the things, but this is definitely one that I'm like, oh my god, I cannot imagine the smells and the sounds and everything.
Yeah, the
else.
smells, right?
I was
smells
so
were brought up
thankful
quite a
this
bit.
wasn't scratch and sniff book. But
Oh my god, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this feels like America's Got Talent. Like, who's going to be the Simon Cowell? That's like, I think you need to get off the stage and try again at a different career.
I think I was like open mouth most of the time reading just some of these. I just could not imagine not knowing anything else at that time, and this is just like, oh, this seems fine. But it was an amazing read. This is my second read on it, and it's amazing each time. It's just
I love that.
W2F,
Yeah, same. A lot of squiggles, a lot of questions. I do a lot of question marks in the margins. Like, what the hell? Love that. Okay, Rachel, thoughts and feels? Let me turn you up.
So obviously I loved it enough to read it again for the book club.
I'm so sorry, Rachel. I can't really hear you that well.
Ooh.
No, I can't. It's so weird. I can't hear you at all. You want to try and take the headphones out entirely? Scratch and sniff. Scratch and sniff. Morbidly curious. We need to make candles. That's what we need.
Yeah, can you
Not for
imagine?
Victorian London though, please. Not for
No,
Oh,
that
here.
would be horrible.
Try again, Rachel.
Oh.
No, can't hear you at all. Sorry. I'm editing your mic settings, but okay. I edited your mic settings, but I don't think that's doing much. So sorry, Alyssa. We'll get back to Rachel here in a second. Alyssa, thoughts and feels.
I love this book. This is my second time reading it,
Oh.
and it's been enough time since I read it that I forgot things. So it was like reading it for the first time.
That's great.
And I read like 100 pages of it at a friend's house, and she's very squeamish. So every now and then I would go, ugh. And I would look at her and just be like, can I tell you about it?
Mhm.
Like
Oh,
when the
that's
whole
so
guy's whole
funny.
dingus fell off. Like I can't get over it.
Oh God.
Whole dingus.
His
Listen,
whole dingus.
I wrote this book almost 10 years ago, and I forgot about that detail. But I remember I used to share it with audiences, and people, men really did not like that detail at all. So
It's
Yes.
funny. I even have a fun fact on. I was talking about this earlier on the Patreon Discord. I have one of the facts from the book on my dating profile.
oh, I love that. That you weed the people out if they don't.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
find your people with those kinds of facts.
But yeah, I love this book a lot. It's very accessible to read for people who like me who are not scientists or even I'm not a historian. I'm just a librarian.
I love that. I love that. I always
We
say,
need you.
even if you don't like history, you might like medical history because everybody
Yes.
knows what it's like to be sick. And
I
it's,
say that to Chris all the time,
Yeah.
and he still doesn't care. He still won't read it, and I'm so bummed.
is
Christopher was a
Chris your
former-
husband?
Future husband, yes.
Okay, I need to
Yes.
have a talk with him. I think.
Thank you.
know,
I will
so-
bring him in here right now. No, I'm just kidding. He was a former EMT and everything too. Like he's done weird shit. Like I feel like he would
that's
like
crazy. Yeah.
it. Thank you.
I mean, medical people love this stuff because it's almost like a genealogy, of where they came from. With the FACEMAKER too, a lot of plastic surgeons, they feel like Harold Gillies, whom the book is about, is like their grandfather or great grandfather, and oftentimes there's only like 1 or 2 degrees of separation between Gillies and the surgeons I'm talking to, which seems crazy. World War I seems like so long ago, but actually, I'll meet somebody who was trained by somebody who was trained by him. So it's pretty incredible.
Yes, for free meal
Yeah.
source.
Oh yeah, you don't want to eat meat when you're
Yeah, well, I want to hit that question here in a second. Other Tam in the live show. Tam,
Hi.
what did you think?
Yes. This was such an easy 5 out of 5 for me. This is actually my second favorite Morbidly Curious pick of all time. So loved it. The
Oh, thank
FACEMAKER is
you.
going to be very quickly bumped up on my TBR. I love everything to do about Victorian history, medical history. So this was so interesting. I ate it up. Also very accessible because I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but loved it so much.
I love to hear that. Well, FACEMAKER, somebody said in the comments too, that's narrated by Daniel Gillies.
And that's so cool. That's so cool that you did that.
I joked to him. He's an actor. He's in Vampire Diaries and he's been in a lot of things. And I said, well, Daniel, it's your great great uncle. And so he said, yeah, I'll do it. And so it was really fun because he of course knew about Harold Gillies, but not to that extent. But also you guys have to Google Daniel Gillies because he is a really good looking guy. And I find it really funny that the father of plastic surgery has this great nephew who's just this perfect face. And so there's a production company that's interested in possibly making this into a movie. And I said to Daniel, we'd love to get you involved. But also, I think he should be one of the soldiers whose faces is destroyed and then rebuilt into this gorgeous Daniel Gillies at the end or whatever, But yeah, it was really fun. And of course, the butchering art was narrated by a guy named Ralph Lister, who just happened to be a distant relative of Joseph Lister, whom the book's about. So that was really good fun.
And what a cool thing for them too, because I doubt they knew that much about their relatives. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, that was fun for them to kind of learn the gritty details about Harold Gillies in the First World War. So
that's so interesting though. So that wasn't on purpose. He literally got just picked to.
Oh yeah, so Ralph Lister. So they sent me a couple of voice actors, and some of them were women. And I don't know. I mean, I know I'm a woman who wrote the book, but it felt like it needed to be narrated by a British male voice to me. So I asked for that, and they sent a couple of people, and one of them was Ralph Lister. And I said, wait a second, is he related to Joseph Lister? They go back to him, and they're like, yeah, he is. And I'm like, I don't even care what he sounds like. He's got to be crazy. But I think I've actually never listened to the audio. But I hear he did a great job with that. So my next book, which I'll talk about in a minute because I saw somebody ask that question, but I'm not going to be able to find a relative of the next person. So I'm going to be breaking that streak, unfortunately.
Bummer.
Yeah.
So I do have to ask Lindsey now, and I'm not going to get too in the nitty gritty of this, but I am curious about the butchering art in your writing journey. tell us where this is at, because I remember you posting something about how you wrote this in like, you know, the midst of like a pretty tumultuous time in your life. So just tell us like how much the butchering art means to you, and if you had to give it a rating, what would you give it?
If I got, well, you know what, you know, you can't go back and write a book. And now all I see is the things I would do differently if I look back on it. And I'm growing as a writer. And so I actually think The FACEMAKER is a better written book. I've learned a lot since The Butchering Art, but it's funny because I said, I think The FACEMAKER at the end of my career will be my most important book because it's a disability history. It's, you know, giving voice to people that were really hidden. But The Butchering Art's probably going to be one of my most popular books. So people love that Victorian world, and so do I. And I'm going to be returning to that for the next book as well. I like the kind of faraway history books as well. They're a little bit easier ethically. So with The FACEMAKER, I had to prove that these soldiers were dead to access their medical records. And it was a real kind of nightmare. A lot of things were still in copyright. So that was difficult to navigate. But yeah, so what happened was, so I'm a medical historian. I have a PhD in the history of science and medicine from Oxford. I was an academic for the most part. In 2015, my now ex-husband disappeared. You know how like they used to tell stories about like men would disappear, like he disappeared. I went back to London and he just was like poof, gone. And I found out later that he ran off with a very young woman. And in the midst of that, he reported me as illegally in the country because I was on a marriage visa. So he said, the marriage is over, you need to deport her. So they took my passport. I wasn't allowed to work. I had no money. I mean, I was really at the lowest point in my life. And I decided I was going to fight my deportation. So I wrote a 500-page petition. I got hooked up with an excellent lawyer who's actually thanked in The Butchering Art, and we've become really good friends. Her name's Farhana. And we fought him. We got a settlement. And in the midst of this, I wrote this proposal, and his lawyers were calling me failed writer. And they said she's a failed writer, and you know she's a drain on this man. And it was really awful. And so we settled in court. We settled the divorce. And then 2 weeks later, I went to sell this book. I had no idea if anybody'd buy it. And it sold in a preempt offer for a lot of money, more money than I ever thought I could sell a book for. And then literally the next morning, the Home Office came back to me and they granted me a permanent visa to remain in the UK. And it was like everything fixed itself. Unfortunately, he came knocking after the press release. He wanted to know how much the book was worth. And so that I couldn't shake him at that point. But it was a crazy situation. And so I always say that even as imperfect as I think the book is now, when I look back on it, you know, Joseph Lister probably saved more lives than any other person to ever live. If you just extrapolate what we can now do because of germ theory and antisepsis. And he kind of saved my life too, because he it just lifted me out of this situation, and I became the writer I always wanted to be. And it's just been glorious. And I never really looked back. And also, by the way, spite is a very good motivator in life.
Yes, it is.
So, I always say my whole career is out of spite, but no, it's been great. And I'm remarried. My husband Adrian is a caricaturist. Actually, you can kind of see Edgar Allan Poe over the mantle, and he illustrates my children's books, and he also co-writes them. And so if you guys have kids 8 to 12, I have Plague Busters is out right now. It's about smallpox and rabies and just like all the terrible things. Bubonic plague, it's all in there. You can see.
I want that for me.
Yeah, I know. We always say that adults as well will love this book. And then we have another one coming out in October, and it's called Dead Ends, and you can get a signed copy through Mysterious Books Shop. And it's about the medicine's biggest failures and how failure often leads to success. And this really struck me during the pandemic, because a lot of times people would say, well, the advice changed, like they don't know what they're talking about. But I always thought that's good, because we're learning more about this virus and we're changing the advice, and that's what you want to see with the scientific process. So it's got all these crazy stories, dead ends. And one of my favorite stories is at the very end about incubators. The incubators were invented, and people didn't think that, the medical community didn't think they were useful. And there was a guy who set up these incubators in Coney Island, And he charged, you could come see the preemie babies in the incubators, and it paid for the cost of keeping them in there. And it was amazing, and people were amazed, and the medical community thought, oh my gosh, this actually works. So there's some great stories in Dead Ends. And yeah, even if you don't have kids, I think it's all illustrated and it's real good fun. So
yeah, I'm an elementary school librarian, so I'm like, I will be ordering this at the beginning of the year.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, that's great. Get in touch. Well, I'll send you some, we have
Oh, that's cute.
special like stickers and stuff to put in it and stuff. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
And then this cover. So I had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and then I think it was 2 days later, Adrian was like, you need to get in this plague doctor outfit and you need to pose so I could get like the version of it right. But what was funny about this cover was the first cover we came up with, I loved, which was a plague doctor, and it was a crystal ball. And inside were all these different germs. And I thought, oh, this is great, because like, what's the next big thing? But they said, oh, well, crystal balls aren't real. And I was like, but dancing plague doctors or plague mice are. So I don't really know what the kind of like, where's the line for kids' books? Like we have like crazy viruses in the back. I guess that's okay. But yeah, so, and then for Dead Ends, the original cover we came up with was, there's this experiment during the French Revolution where they're chopping everybody's heads off, and these doctors are trying to figure out how long you stay alive. And so Adrian drew the cover, so it was a guillotine, and it's like the severed head, and the doctor with a stethoscope looking, it was all cartoon and everything. But the publisher's like, oh, it's a little bit too gruesome. So we went with, I know, kids love the gruesome. So we went with galvanism instead. So you can see he's electrocuting, trying to shock the corpse back to life, which is also a story we tell in there. So that's going to be a really fun one, I think. But it's hard, kids nonfiction. I mean, forget it. It's really hard to get press and stuff for that kind of thing. So, but the kids who pick it up seem to like it. So yeah, if you guys have young readers, definitely go and pre-order that one. You can get signed copies for the Mysterious Bookshop, and we always appreciate those kinds of pre-orders as authors. So. Oh yeah, Rachel might be back.
Yeah.
Up.
Well, I was gonna say really quick while Chris is here too. Chris, this is the author Lindsey.
Oh hey, I heard you don't like medical history.
I just don't like it. I'm not a big reader.
Lindsey wanted to tell you.
Have a word with you. Yeah, we're gonna have an intervention.
Oh god. Here we go.
I know. No, but I mean, I always
say,
if you don't give it a try, just give it a go. Just 10 pages.
Okay.
That's all I was telling you about. I was like, I think you would really like this.
Yeah, I think I'd like it too. But if my ADHD brain can sit down for 20 minutes, then.
Well, we'll see. I mean, so when I was writing this book, I thought when I started coming up with this concept, I thought somebody must have written this book, but nobody had on the commercial level. And I read that as the book opens, it's Joseph. Well, it opens with the first anesthetic surgery. So this first surgery under ether in Britain. With this guy named Robert Liston, who was the fastest knife in the West End. He was 6'2", he was really tall, he could take off your leg in 30 seconds. And there's all these kinds of medical mishaps he gets into. I think there's a story where somebody jumps off the table and runs into a closet, and he like chases the guy and rips the door off the hinges. And I mean, this would be awful, right? It's comedy because it's happened so long ago, but I imagine if you were like witnessing this in the operating theater, it would be very traumatic. But he was really well known for his speed, and he performs this surgery under ether in 1846. He doesn't think it's going to work. He calls it the Yankee Dodge because it was discovered in America, and it works. And it's this huge moment in medicine. And what I found fascinating about that moment was that a 17-year-old Joseph Lister was in the audience, and that's really who my book is about, because he's the one who ultimately solves the biggest mystery, which is what is killing patients, and that's germ theory. So, it's weird because anesthesia comes about, everything gets a little bit better in the sense that the patients don't feel anything, but actually it gets more dangerous because the surgeon's more willing to pick up the knife, they're willing to go deeper into the body, and these surgeries just become slow-moving executions because post-operative infection rises. So that's really what it's about. that's my pitch to you.
All right, this is intriguing. Yes.
So yeah, it was the original Fear Factor. You didn't want to be on that Victorian medical table, that operating table.
I would love a slice of cake.
Slice of cake. Okay. Birthday cake.
Rachel, can we hear you?
Oh, I don't know.
No, we can't. I'm so sorry.
Oh. Do you want to try to come in and out? Maybe sign in and out?
Actually, too, I don't know if you're connected to CarPlay, but my CarPlay sometimes boots me off.
Mine does too.
Oh, no, that was Kimberly, I think, that said that. Oh, no, so, but it wasn't Rachel who said that, right?
Because I filmed a couple of videos in my car, not realizing that once it's connected to CarPlay, you can't hear a word I'm saying.
Oh yeah, the vivisection of the frog and the dog was difficult, and you know, people. It's interesting because when you're writing a book, you don't know how far to take the story. Some people thought the butchering art was too graphic, but my feeling was that I would be doing a disservice to the patients who survived these surgeries if I wasn't explaining exactly how horrible and terrifying and dangerous it really was. So I kind of leaned into it. But the animal stuff always, you know, is weirdly like harder for a lot of readers to read as well. But again, a lot of animals and vivisection is responsible for how medicine progressed. And so I felt like it was important at least to acknowledge some of that in the book. But I think I had more in the book, and my editor was like, oh, you got to take some of it out because it does get a little bit too graphic. So it's good to have an editor who kind of has that, you know, eagle eye view to say, too much, Lindsey. We need to dial this back.
I just texted Rachel. She just dropped off, so I just want to make sure that she can hop again. I feel so bad. I don't know what's going on. My car's off, so it's not CarPlay. Let me just try again. But we'll go ahead and when she hops back in, we will get her thoughts and feels. So we'll go ahead and move on to.
Oh yeah, the wife sales. Somebody said, yeah. Sorry guys. I have this terrible cold too.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I
hated the dog story. Same.
I completely, you know, I wrote this book almost 10 years ago, so I've forgotten some of the finer details. But the wife sales. Actually, the next book, while we're waiting for Rachel, is called Sleuth Hound. It's going to be coming out next year, and it's about a guy named Joseph Bell. Oh, I think we can hear you now, Rachel.
Definitely have audio now, but I think it's. Oh my gosh, that's so weird. I don't know what's going on. It's like we hear feedback, but we don't hear your voice for some reason.
Oh yeah, that is weird. Oh, no.
I'm so sorry, Rachel. Here.
Sorry, Rachel. No.
It's okay. It's probably my fault somehow.
Oh, okay. You're there. You're in.
Okay.
We can hear you. Yeah.
We made it. I don't know what was happening to it because the mic testing thing was telling me it works. So I don't know what happened.
Okay.
But I'm here.
Well, while we have you, tell us your thoughts. Tell us your thoughts before we lose you.
No, I loved it. This was a reread for me. So I think it was 4 years since I read it, and so it was really interesting to see like what I remembered and what felt new. But I really loved it, and I really loved the way that it felt researched, and it really felt like you were there.
Thank you.
Yes.
And the way that you really felt like we really understood Lister, and like we weren't just being told facts about some guy, but we were like really understanding like who he was and why he wanted to do the things that he did and why he made the choices that he made.
Yeah, I got really lucky with Lister because there was a lot of letters between him and his father. And it really kind of gave an insight. I mean, for him, he was a Quaker, and it seemed to be almost like a calling for him. There were various points in his life when I think he may have given medicine up. It was very frustrating. You know, if you think about it, like it is kind of funny with Robert Liston going in and pulling the patient onto the table and stuff. But also beyond that, the surgeons were real people, and it would have been really hard to keep going in there and losing the patient and not understanding why they were dying. And there's a great show called The Nick. I don't know if anybody's seen it. So good, right? And it's the turn of the 20s. So I always say butchering art's kind of like the prequel to The Nick, because The Nick's sort of the turn of the century. So things are actually better at that stage. They understand germ theory. But yeah, it's they illustrate it very brilliantly in the first episode of The Nick. The frustration of going into that operating room and just always losing these patients. And so I tried to get into Lister's head a bit. One of the characters I would have liked to have known more about would be Agnes, his wife, but there just simply wasn't that much, there weren't that many records. But I got a sense that they were childless. And I got a sense that she was really played a big role in his career. And she was kind of like the woman in the background who was keeping this maybe disorganized mind to track. And she was constantly transcribing his notes and things like that. So I think she played really quite a big role in what he was able to accomplish.
Agreed. And also, I think part of the issue, Rachel, is that your phone is possessed, because while you were talking, there was also a man's voice like popping.
Yeah, that was weird. I heard that too.
So not to scare you,
Interesting, because there's no one else in this car.
There it was again.
Go back and listen to it, man, because that is weird. I don't know. We can hear you. We can hear you, but for some reason, there's like this voice. So let's actually go on. So another question I had, of course, is when it comes to books like this, we had this issue with gory details as well, where there's just so much information in these books, it's hard for us to pin down. But I guess I do want to hit on the Quaker religious upbringing, but I also wanted to just discuss the most shocking and fascinating parts about early hospital conditions. What will you take away from this text? Like, what did you learn from this? I want to get to you eventually, Lindsey, and talk about some of the stuff that was shocking or fascinating within your research, which you didn't know before, but I'll go ahead and go through the chat here or the group really quick and just kind of hit. Kimberly, do you mind starting us off with just some of the most shocking and fascinating things that you learned from reading this?
I tried to really put my head into the Victorian mindset a little bit and like get away from all my like present knowledge a little. And I just don't know. I mean, you have to be like, I didn't know any better, but it was the fact that like how bad the hospital smelled, the fact that there was just layers of like body fluids and it was like decomp and like,
yes,
feeling confident that you're going to be okay in that. And then just be like, let's just throw hay on it. Like there's just layers of body fluids, hay, body fluid. It was like I don't even know. It was a really stinky bad medical lasagna that I just couldn't imagine.
Yes. Like, and all the talks of like mushrooms in the chat too. I forgot about that.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Mushrooms in the bed.
I could not imagine. I think that was just so shocking. And I think it was kind of interesting how people were just very like weary of going to the hospital. You can see how that kind of segues into people wanting to stay home and, you know, heal and home births and all that stuff too. So it was just, that was the most shocking thing. Is like, I wouldn't want to step in there. I just couldn't imagine like.
Actually, Perla's comment about Gross. So Samuel Gross is pictured he is an American surgeon. He's pictured on the cover, the US cover.
Oh, yeah.
That's a Thomas Eakins painting. And it's Samuel Gross. He didn't believe in Lister's germ theory. And he would go into the operating theater and he would slam the door and he would say, there, Mr. Lister's germs can't get in anymore. And he kind of made a joke of it. Wow. And in this picture, this is pre-Lister. So here he is like in his street clothes and he's operating. There's a woman in the back wearing black and she's covering her face. They think that's the mother of the patient. But what's interesting is if you look up the UK cover, Thomas Eakins does another painting 10 years later, and it's completely different. The doctors are wearing white, it's lighter. Women are appearing in that scene as medical nurses. And so you see that Listerine revolution happen. And so when the UK was coming up with its own cover, I said, why don't we use the second Thomas Eakins painting? Because then these books can be in conversation with each other. So you really get that sense of, in a very short period of time, how much changes in medicine.
Oh, man.
I thought that was such a nice touch that you mentioned that too. So
the medical lasagna that needs to like
I know.
That needs to become bumpers.
It needs to be like a blurb on the cover of the book. Like
yeah. So Rachel and Lister's ghost. Do you want to tell us some of the most shocking things?
Sorry.
Oh, we lost you again.
Oh God. Oh.
I also need to. I know you want to come hang out because I have food on the counter, but I can't give you anything right now. I'm so sorry. Dad's gonna come get you.
I don't, somebody asked, is that where gross anatomy comes from? I don't think so, but I don't know where that term comes from. But Samuel Gross does do a big mea culpa at the end, and he does apologize essentially and say he was wrong. So I've always said that if there's a movie, I really think it should. Do you guys remember the movie Amadeus? like an old one, but it's Mozart, and he's kind of pitted against you know, his enemy who's very jealous of him. I think that if the butchering are turned into a movie, it really has to be kind of Lister pitted against somebody who represents the establishment, and you know, just how hard that was to convince doctors that they needed to clean up their act, essentially. It took, you know, decades in some cases. America was very slow to adopt Lister's theories. Surprise, surprise, we were a little bit behind the times. So Europe kind of got on board a little bit quicker, but during the American Civil War, we were still packing wounds with mud. So it was horrible. I know. Hey, I didn't mention teeth though this time. So I know that's your Achilles heel is the teeth. The no toothbrushes in the World War I really got to you.
I can't, like, the fuzzy feeling, you know.
That's also like such an American thing to zone in on. Like, yeah. Oh, the teeth, you know, the no toothbrushes. But I mentioned the toothbrushes in the FACEMAKER because, you know, if your face is being blown off and you have all this bacteria already in your mouth, like there's so many problems that need to be fixed, not just, you know, obviously the face and the missing parts to the face, but just like the infections and stuff.
Sorry, I lost my dog there for a second. Rachel, do you want to try again? I feel so bad. Nar.
She's oh
God, she's haunted.
I'm gonna turn off your echo cancellation. Let me see if that does anything. Try again. No.
Yes, Tori, that's a good point. Garfield. I love that you brought this up because the guy who used to run the Garfield Museum in Ohio would like troll me with Garfield facts. Like it was so funny. It was like a president I never really thought about. And when this book was coming out, he'd like hit me with these Garfield facts, you know? And so when I went on tour, I went to the Garfield house to speak because he was just constantly like, President Garfield is like the most fascinating president. You need to come visit the house. And yes, when he was shot, the surgeons didn't believe in antisepsis, even though Lister at this point was going around talking about it. And they stuck their dirty fingers in the bullet wound, and he got septic. And I think it took many months for him to die, and he kind of wasted away, and it was a really awful death. And you have to wonder what would have happened if they had taken the measures that Lister was saying to take at the time. So yeah, I love anybody who brings up Garfield because it reminds me of that guy Todd who used to run the museum, and he was like always hitting me with Garfield facts. And I thought, God, I've never thought about President Garfield. Like it's just not something that's ever gotten onto my radar. But now I know all this stuff about President Garfield. So if you live in Ohio, you should go visit the Garfield house because it is pretty fascinating.
I was texting Ray. I feel so bad that I can't figure out Rachel's issue. I feel so bad. Alyssa, do you want to talk about shocking, fascinating, and then did you already tell us what was on your dating profile, or are we getting?
Oh, I haven't said that, but I will. It's not like super shocking or anything because it's not weeding out too much yet. I mean, it's weeding out a lot because nobody messages me on Hinge, but it's like the what's a fact that you love, and it's a voice prompt, so it's just me talking about the naming of Listerine.
Oh gosh, I love that
because I thought it was cool.
Yeah, you gotta find your people. Whatever way you gotta do it, you gotta bring in some morbid facts. But yeah, people, when I go around America talking about the butchering art, Americans are a lot less familiar with who Joseph Lister is than British people. And so I always say Listerine, but he didn't create it. It was named for him, but not by him. And it was used to treat gonorrhea originally. And I went on live TV in Britain. It was like a Sunday morning show. And they told me beforehand, they're like, you can't say gonorrhea, like you can say STD. But anyway, they were very nervous about me going on. They were like, you can't say anything too graphic. And so I'm on this live show, and the first thing the host says is, what's the grossest thing you know? And I was like, looking at the camera, and I thought, I can't say this, you know, like this is live TV, and everybody's like hungover on Sunday morning. They're not going to want to hear it. But I did tell the Listerine story, and people on Twitter were like, oh, she's telling people to throw Listerine on that gonorrhea. I'm like, no, guys, like it's not. I'm not a medical doctor, and please do not use Listerine on your gonorrhea. But that was one of the original uses of Listerine. So hey, TJ Mitchell's here. So amazing.
Yeah. You know, like my notes literally say verbatim, you know, it was crazy in there smell wise.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
nuts. Once again, bringing up Dingus Guy, can't get over it. It so there's something that I really liked. It's not necessarily shocking, but I guess it is kind of shocking. I don't know.
We're so desensitized, so it's hard for us
Yeah.
to say.
I talked about this with my chapter yesterday about how like the doctors having such a hard time adjusting to the concept of germ theory, specifically because it implicates them in the deaths of many, many people and how they just cannot emotionally or mentally handle that. I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the things, and I talk about this in Dead Ends, and always plugging that children's book coming out. But one of the things is that often the biggest resistance is within the medical community itself. And a lot of times, you know, when there's a paradigm shift, you know, a lot of doctors, they're like puzzle solvers. And so they're solving the puzzle according to the rules that have already been laid out. And it often takes somebody sort of from the outside to come up with a solution. And so in Lister's case, you know, people will say, well, that's crazy that they didn't believe in germs. But if you think about it, here's this young guy, he's coming along, he's telling you that there are these invisible creatures, that they are killing your patients. He can see them with the microscope, which is something that's generally not used in medicine at this time. And you have to believe me, they're killing your patients. And so it was a real leap of faith. The other issue was that many of the older surgeons were trained with speed in mind before anesthesia. So that when you bring antisepsis in, everything has to slow down. Now, at this point, anesthesia is already there, so it's not a huge issue to slow things down. But when you're trained to think of like speed as a virtue, I think that was very difficult for a lot of surgeons. And of course, what you say, which is they had to admit that they had been unknowingly killing their patients all along. And I think that was a really hard pill to swallow. And it's a lesson that we see over and over again in science and medicine. I always say ulcers, you know, when I was a kid, they would say ulcers were caused by stress and eating and stuff. And then there were these two doctors, I think in Australia, who thought, well, they thought it was caused by bacteria. And so they swallowed the bacteria and they showed that, yes, they could treat it with an antibiotic, and they won the Nobel Prize for it. But it took, even after they proved that, it took a while before people really took that on board. And even as I say it, like, you know, I could hear my grandma going, oh, you know, like stress, or, you know, don't eat all that taco sauce. Like, oh God, like an ulcer, like none of that. It will aggravate an ulcer, but it wouldn't cause an ulcer. So we see this over and over again. And we're seeing, you know, a revolution now with these mRNA vaccines, which could really unlock a lot of good stuff on how we treat cancer. I'm obviously really interested in that, having just come through cancer. My husband just had prostate cancer. We're both kind of living examples of catch it early, doesn't have to be necessarily fatal with a lot of cancers. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And by the way, anybody here who gets a diagnosis, I always tell people, today is the best day to be alive, and tomorrow is going to be even better. And so I think that's a positive message to take. You know, you're not in the 19th century, and things are moving so fast now. You know, Lister really wasn't that long ago, but look at what we can do comparatively to what was done in the 19th century.
Yes. Yeah. It would come when that was actually a discussion point. I think it was the Charlotte meeting. They're like, this really wasn't that long ago. Like, if you really
wasn't. No, I know.
It's not that long ago. And I did the COVID stuff. Definitely saw the parallels with that for sure. But also, it was so funny to me whenever, you know, COVID was first making the rounds and people were telling people how to wash hands and for how long. And I'm like, oh, so we haven't been doing that? No wonder.
Do you remember like Boris? Well, I mean, maybe not here, but like Boris Johnson was like, all you have to do is sing happy birthday twice. Yeah. And like nobody, like Britain did not lock down quick enough. Like nobody, I mean, and again, that the history of pandemics, you know, I remember I was talking to my manager and he was out in LA and I said, oh, I don't think it's gonna, you know, turn into like a global pandemic. I said, but I know as a medical historian that there are like psychological stages of a pandemic, and the first is denial. And we kind of like laughed, and then we're like, is that the stage we're in right now? So the first stage is denial, and the second stage is blaming others. So like we saw that with COVID, where it was like, well, it's old people who are going to die. Like it's not going to be young people and stuff. And so you kind of justify it. Like you saw this with HIV/AIDS, but you kind of go through all those stages. So it was interesting as a medical historian to kind of see that play out. And it was sad as well, because I feel like we repeat a lot of the same resistance and mistakes that you see in the past. You know, the Great Flu pandemic in the early 20th century. That it was very similar in that sense. So it's fascinating. We just seem to be, you know, we just seem to have to repeat these errors over and over again, I guess, as humans. But
yeah, and agreed, Cam, totally. Cam to Tam. Let's not get that mixed up again.
And yeah, like just real quick, just like on what Lindsay was touching on, like I imagine ego and pride also played really big parts in like, oh, I don't want to like change my way of doing things, especially when it came to like surgeons. Yeah. But I think to answer the question, a quote from the book actually sums up my most fascinating thing about early hospital practices. And it's when Erickson is treating this woman with like an acute disease of the larynx. Mm-hmm. And the quote is, "At that moment, Erickson improvised something extraordinary. He clamped his mouth around the open wound in her neck and began to suck out the blood and mucus blocking her air passage." And my annotation is, "I beg your finest pardon."
Yeah, and he lives too. Like he should have died. Like that was such an insane thing to do. Yeah, they were just
listening with like the knife or like the scalpel in the mouth or like whatever, and like the unwashed instruments. I'm like, my OCD.
So that was funny, but they didn't clean it up because they wanted to be clean. They cleaned it up because they didn't want to freak people out with the amount of
because the operating theater was like entertainment, you know, just like going to the opera or like whatever. So they had to keep that appearance.
Okay, but who would watch a surgery live if that was?
You guys, we do this all the time. Think about how many reality shows there are. And people are like, "Oh, the Victorians were so gruesome," but like there are so many medical reality shows out there, like, you know, Pimple Popper and Botched, and you know, I mean, think about it. Like we're all fascinated still, and in medical museums, and remember Body Worlds, you know. So a lot of that stuff is still, I think we still crave an understanding of that, and and there is like kind of an exhilaration, you know, putting yourself on that table and everything. But I always imagine like how horrible it would be as the patient, like you're, you know, being brought in, especially before anesthesia, you're seeing everybody's reactions to this. It just would have been horrible. So.
And what I'm going to take away is that I am, again, not in the 19th century. I'm so glad. I'm so happy to live in our current century.
I know, even with all the weird stuff going on right now, it's still preferable. At least people say, well, would you travel to, you know, back in time? No, I would. I would be instantly there, and I would like cut myself with, you know, and I would get an infection.
And there you go.
No, never. I mean, unless I was allowed to bring antibiotics and a whole bunch of good stuff with me. But I mean, you even think about antibiotics with the FACEMAKER in World War I, that was before antibiotics as well. So, you know, again, it's not that long ago, but there was some real, and in World War I, they did understand germ theory, but battlefield surgeons were so overwhelmed by the sheer number of men requiring help that they often just kind of hastily stitch the face together. If you've ever cut your face, you'll know it's very vascular, it bleeds and bleeds. And so they would hastily stitch it, and they would literally seal these men's fate because they were sealing in the battlefield bacteria with it. And so infection rates could be really high in the First World War as well. I gotta cross promote all books, guys. I'm a freelance writer. Like, I know, if I can't get in mentions of all books, am I really doing my job as a writer?
I am super excited for Sleuth Hound.
So I got interrupted. So the next book is Sleuth Hound. It's about a guy named Joseph Bell, who was the professor of Arthur Conan Doyle, and he was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. He worked unofficially with the police on a lot of murder cases. And what happens is Arthur Conan Doyle, he really hates Sherlock Holmes. Like, he wants to be a writer, and then Sherlock Holmes becomes so popular, but he can't understand it. He's like, why this character? And so he decides to kill off Sherlock Holmes. And just as he kills off Sherlock Holmes, he outs Joseph Bell as the real Sherlock Holmes. And there's all this like press frenzy around Joseph Bell. And it's just as he's about to step onto the stage to testify in one of the biggest murder cases of the 19th century up in Scotland. So it's kind of like this perfect dramatic buildup. And it's about early forensics. We're going back to the world of Lister. In fact, Joseph Bell and Lister were contemporaries. So all of the characters that, were in this book, they're familiar to that world. So it's kind of like getting into a nice warm bath. Like, it was easy. The FACEMAKER was really hard. I knew nothing about the First World War. And I've told people this, it was not the book I wanted to write as my second book. I had pitched an entirely different book. My publisher didn't want that. And so I pitched this one on the back of a napkin, not knowing anything about the First World War. And they were like, that's the book we want. And so I had to start really from the beginning. I knew nothing about Gillies, facial reconstruction, First World War. So it was almost like doing a PhD and then having to like make it readable and accessible and interesting to people. So I was excited to get back to the 19th century with Sleuthhound. So that will be coming out next year if I ever finish it, if I ever get back to the UK to finish it. So one chapter left, guys. I can't get back to the UK at the moment. So
not available for pre-order yet, but trust me, when it is, you guys will be the first to know. I will.
Yeah, and I'd love to set up something. I was talking to my editor. I'd love to set up something special for the book club, so that you guys get first dibs on this book and everything. So I'll have to work out with them, but we'll definitely get that sorted. You get signed copies and all of that. But I think it's gonna be fun, like forensics. I mean, Judy, you're gonna love it. Like all the weird. One of the weirdest things that I love to talk about in the book is this idea that the lens of the eye was like a camera. And so when somebody was killed, that they thought you could see the murderer on the lens of the eye. And even in the Ripper case, they removed the eyes of one of the victims because they think that maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to see Jack the Ripper. And it became such a widespread belief that murderers would actually take the eyes out of their victims sometimes just to kind of avoid being caught in this way. So there's all these really amazing early forensic beliefs. And the other thing was, somebody mentioned the wife sales, but I do talk about how so much of early forensics is really built on the brutalized bodies of women, right? Women had very few rights and they're being murdered in shocking ways. I have chapters where Bell is working on these cases with his partner, Little John. And, I remember reading one case where the husband was brought up for murder, but they said, well, he didn't mean to murder her because when he kicked her in the stomach and she was pregnant, he wasn't wearing his boots. And so it was completely an accident, but he did kill her. And so it's really shocking. And I think that's something that, we definitely have to keep at the forefront of our minds when we are thinking about forensics, because I watch, I don't know about you guys, but I watch Dateline and stuff all the time.
All the time. I go to bed
all the time. Oh my God. My husband did a caricature of Keith Morrison for my birthday. Like I love it. I love Dateline. But if you watch them like in a row, like I do, you'll notice like most of it's women, or Forensic Files. Like it's women who like refuse to sleep with a guy, and then and so you start to see these patterns. And so definitely when I was writing Sleuthhound, I deal with Ripper as well because Joseph Bell works on that case, and it's interesting. And depressing to see how many women just, were murdered and how few repercussions there were in that period. So
Jay is a friend of mine from the Belmont bookshop chapter, and
man, historically we are just the worst. I like that.
Poor Jay is like just our token guy at these meetings. He's the one guy that's always there, and I feel so bad because every meeting we're just like, I feel like the common denominator for most of these Morbidly Curious books is just shitty men, and Jay's always
shitty men. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Also, I did want to highlight this because you're talking about that, and that made me think of this part in the book where Lister's testimony put that guy not away, but like exiled him to another country. But like him saving her life, and that part to me was I got chills reading it. So much respect for Lister and all that he was able to do at that part.
Well, yeah, and if you like that chapter, basically Sleuthhound is all that, because this is like the period when medical experts start to arise, and it's fascinating because you get a real glimpse into what was considered, professional testimony. I did, for The Curious Life and Death, I did Lizzie Borden. Do you guys remember Lizzie Borden?
Oh,
She took an axe, killed her father, or whatever the rhyme is. And so we covered that, and I had to take an axe, and we had these ballistic dummies filled with blood, but it was blue blood, so it didn't upset me. Like, you remember the early 90s period commercials? It was like blue. I guess people don't find that as upsetting. Anyway, so I had to take this axe, and I had to see how much blood I would be covered in, because it was said that Lizzie Borden wasn't covered in any blood. And I thought if you take an axe or a hatchet and you hit somebody in the head with it, like the head's gonna break open. It was so hard. Hot tip, guys, if you want to kill somebody, don't use a hatchet. Like, you have to be really strong. And I'm a big person, like I'm almost 6 feet tall, and she was so tiny. And I thought, and I remember the director said at one point, he goes, cut. He goes, Lindsay, do you need somebody to come in and break it for you? And I was like, no, we're trying to
let me do it.
That a woman could do this, and I'm going to do it. But I asked this police officer who was on the show with me, I said, how is this even possible? And he said, well, when you have the adrenaline and the hate, he's like, you can do a lot more damage. But I'm just like, silly on camera, like having to do this stupid thing. But yeah, we did Lizzie Borden. But I remember saying to my dad, well, she had to have done it, right? I said she had to have done it because, like, who was just kind of randomly going into houses and hatcheting people? And he said that there was a book, and I don't know the name, but this could be a good book for you guys to read. This author discovered that in the late 19th century to early 20th century, there was a serial killer who was taking the train across the East Coast, and he was literally doing that. He was hatcheting people to death. There was no apparent reason, but there were people in those communities who were being charged with those murders and were being executed for those murders. And so this author contends that actually it was this person that they uncovered. And so I thought, wow, could the Lizzie Borden murders have been sort of an early example of this? But they said when Lizzie Borden was at trial, they brought the skulls in of her stepmother and her father, and she fainted. So this was like the time of like theatrics, like they would bring in, just pieces of the dead body and just, display it. So I don't think they do that anymore. Judy probably could shed light on that, but I think they're very careful. I think they do show pretty graphic stuff in some cases, but they're also very careful. Medical illustrators often step in and take out the gore, and they create illustrations and stuff for court displays. So
this is also true. Also, too, I have a friend who wrote, I believe it's technically young adult, Lizzie Borden book, nonfiction. And then I have a friend who's also writing a Lizzie Borden book at the moment. She actually works at the Conjuring House.
Oh, right.
So, I've got all the Lizzie Borden book.
Oh, it's a fascinating story. I mean, I don't know. We're never gonna. We're never
gonna know.
Personally, I think she did do it. I think she had the opportunity and the motive. But I tell you what, if she did it, she is really a psycho, because she then requested to be buried next to her father when she died, which I think she is buried next to him. So if she did it, that's a pretty weird thing to, request. But yeah, it's like the Ripper. One of my friends, I don't know if you guys have read this book yet, called The Five, which is about Ripper's 5 victims. Oh,
I love that we have not read it for the book club, but I just had Hallie on the podcast, and I'm editing.
Oh, great! Yeah,
right now I love The Five.
Oh, so Hallie is like this big, okay, and I'm all the height, right? And so whenever we get in a room, I'm like, oh my god, like I can't. And so her last book, which is about Crippen, I was at the book launch in London, and I just happened to be kind of milling where she ended up speaking, and I'm like a good 8 feet behind her, and I still look like enormous. I'm just like in every photo, just like looming over her. And I always say we're a different species, but she's great, and her books are great. And if you're into historical crime, they are brilliant. So
yeah, Story of a Murder, which recently came out, is fantastic. We talked about both of those, and we talked about a lot of true crime and women being.
Yeah. She's always like, Lindsay, you need to stop watching true crime, and I'm like, I'm never gonna do it. But I take her point. Like, we need to be more thoughtful in the way we consume it, but I just love it too much, guys.
No,
Keith
I get it.
Morrison, I can't give up Keith Morrison. So
you can't, and also like it sells. Clearly, people are enjoying it.
Right?
Clearly, people are watching it, and yes, they're reading. Sorry, that's gonna happen. That's gonna happen every time we come to book club. You're reading. Your TBR will grow.
Yeah.
So I did want to let's kind of round this out, because I do typically end these around just so we have time to get ready for our the next book club if you guys are Patreon members. We kind of round this out with a fun question, then we could talk about Lister's legacy after that. But I am curious, of course, if anybody in this book, I'm assuming we're all going to choose Lister, but if there's anybody in this book that you would love to have dinner with Who would it be? Kimberly, take us away.
I am actually going to say probably Julia Sullivan. I would love to just hear a little bit more about her and like what was that, and she's going through this, horrific thing with her husband, but just to know like what was it like going into that surgery? What was the aftercare like and having to like deal with the trial and everything? So it was just like that's kind of who I would want to ask a few more questions to. Yeah. So definitely
lots of Lister's wives too. Lister's father.
Yeah.
Julia's story would be great.
Yeah, I would love to just interview her a little bit and kind of get the woman's perspective on everything that was going on at the time.
Yes. Oh, that pissed me off so much too. Reading about you added some of the articles that people are talking about how women were property.
Oh, get ready for the next book. It's pretty. It does make you. It does put. I think also like we just have to acknowledge too that like a lot of medicine has been built on the bodies of the poor, certainly. It's just part of the reality of medicine, especially in Britain, where the cemeteries and the graveyards were often ransacked, and those usually it was the poor people whose graves were the easiest to pick, and so and forensics, definitely for women, built on women's brutality. So.
Ooh, Lister's sister. That's a band name.
Yes, I was literally thinking of that because she has the mastectomy on Lister's table, and having gone through cancer myself now, I think about breast cancer because the surgeon who invented the mastectomy was a guy named William Halsted, and he was a late 19th century surgeon, and he was crazy. He was like a huge coke addict. He was really addicted to cocaine, so much to the fact that they took him and they like kidnapped him. His friends kidnapped him and put him on a boat to England because they wanted him to dry out. And actually, surgeons being really macho and working till they drop is a hangover of Halsted, because like everybody would try to keep up with him, but they couldn't because he was like coked out of his brain. But he invented the radical mastectomy, but it was brutal. He would take like everything, right? Like he'd even take ribs, and he didn't really care necessarily that it was disfiguring or disabling. But he saved women's lives. But yeah, there was like, when I got breast cancer, I went public, and my surgeon saw on Twitter, and he reached out to me and said, would you like a second opinion? And I was just going to like my local hospital in Britain. And this guy works at the King Edward VII, where the Queen was treated. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll go and see what he has to say, And within minutes, I realized like this was the guy. And he invented something called an eye knife, which detects cancer cells in real time. But also he was great at reconstruction. And it made me think about like how the NHS at least didn't offer me those options. And when you're going through cancer, you don't necessarily think of that at first because you're just worried about the cancer, but you have to live in the body after cancer. And I think that, we shouldn't be shamed to ask those questions. Like if you're going to lose your hair, a lot of women are very scared of losing their hair. I read something like, 15%. It was something, I'm making this up, but it was something really high, like 15% of women will refuse chemo because they're afraid of losing their hair. So we need to have more open dialogue about, those fears so that people don't feel shamed, you got to live in your body. It's okay if you're scared to lose your hair. I didn't have to do chemo, but that was definitely like one of the things I was scared about, like just how much I would change if I had to go through chemo. So yeah, you think about these patients in the 19th century and they had no options. There was no sense of reconstruction or anything like that. And there was also no sense of like, if this left you disabled, that was, your problem to deal with. And so, and it could be life threatening in the sense that if you were working class and you no longer had the ability to work, you could die very impoverished because there was really no social safety net as well. So it, again, makes you happy to live today. But I guess in America, where a lot of these things are being taken away at the moment for disabled people and stuff, like we need to keep that also. We don't want to go back to the 19th century, right? So
yeah, well,
yeah,
they're trying so hard.
They're trying very hard. Alyssa, who are you having dinner with?
I think I would have dinner with shit. I had it ready and then I lost it because I have ADHD and my brain got distracted. Oh, I would have dinner with Louis Pasteur.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
because I just find him so fascinating. I always have, ever since I was like younger and I learned about germ, like his discoveries and stuff. I was like, yeah, this guy. He's
I
cool.
mean, I really wanted to write like a parallel story of Pasteur into the book, but the publisher thought that his story was too well known, which I take that point. But obviously, like, these stories converge, and Pasteur, you know, I always tell people, like, Pasteur was working on this big problem about wine spoiling, because, you know, he's French and the wine is spoiling and we need to figure out why the wine is spoiling and it smelled bad. And then Lister's reading this and he's thinking, I wonder, like, if the smell of the festering wound, if that's kind of like what you smell when wine goes off. I wonder if the same thing is causing this. But I did love Pasteur's moments. One of the things also that probably would have stopped me from writing more about him is I don't know French, so I, you know, getting into like the original language would have been difficult. But yeah, no, he is fascinating, and obviously like a huge part. And it's interesting that they don't like meet until much later in life. And they find somebody tells Pasteur, if I recall, that, oh, this guy Joseph Lister, you know, used your theories to kind of change medicine, and so they become acquainted through that. But it's much later. And I think Lister said something that he never corresponded with Pasteur because he didn't feel that he was worthy enough. He wasn't a scientist as such, and he didn't think that Pasteur would be interested in corresponding with him. So that was also interesting.
Good answer. Tam, who you have an in and out with?
I would say Agnes, because behind every great man is a great woman. So
yeah, that's a great
somebody
answer.
Somebody else said in the comments that like they wanted to see like how much she was involved, and like, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people, because, you know, I shouldn't admit this, but I do sometimes read the Goodreads reviews. You know,
I would be too curious.
Yeah. I know. I'm friends with Eric Larson, who's, you know, just the most brilliant writer, right? And actually, before The Butchering Art came out, I went to New York and I met him for the first time, and we got like wildly drunk. We were like drinking for hours, and at the end of it, he was like, "How are you still like, you know, upright?" And I was like, "Oh, I live in England." Like, that was like an explanation why I can drink so much gin. But he said to me, "I don't think that you should put photos in the book," because he thinks that narrative nonfiction should read like a novel, and he finds photos to be personally interfering. So I didn't with The Butchering Art, and like the first reader reviews that came were like 1 star, no photos. And I said that to him, and he goes, "Oh," he was like, "Oh yeah, readers hate that." And I was like, that could have been information you should have told me. But he generally fights putting photos in his books because he doesn't like that kind of like interruption. It should read like a novel. But, you know, I love his stuff. But, you know, it's funny because he said to me, I never go back. Like, he doesn't do interviews. You know, if I wrote The Devil in the White City, I would be talking about that forever. But he says, I never go back. And when I decided to come on tonight, I thought, I get it, because I was a little bit worried, like, how much do you remember? You know, there's a couple of books, you know, I've written the kids' books. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened since I wrote it. So it is hard to kind of remember the finer details. So I get why he says that now.
I will say it was it last month? What month is it? Where we read The Trail of the Lost, and there was all that talk about one of the people looking for the missing hikers. Her name starts with a C. What was it? Anyway, people were like, Kathy. People were like just throwing it at this woman, talking about, like, you know, it seemed like everybody she like came across, you know, they were like trying to hit on her. And some people in the meeting were like, I really needed the pictures in the middle to think.
I know. I mean, obviously with FACEMAKER, there are photos, and I think
yes, Kathy,
Patricia, you listened to the audiobook, but the FACEMAKER has the photos. But interestingly, my editor at the sort of like final hour said, "Oh, I don't know if we should put the photos in. They're very graphic." And I thought, oh my God, I was like, I have to have the photos, because these soldiers, they were forced to sit on blue benches so that the public didn't look at them. And I was like, I cannot put these men on the blue bench in 2022 when the book came out. We have to look at their faces, and we have to grapple with what war does to the body. And we still really struggle with disfigurement. And the reason I can say that is, think about how many villains are disfigured. All of the Bond villains, Voldemort, you have Darth Vader. He's also Disfigured, you have, I mean, the list just, it just goes on and on. When you start thinking about it, it's a very lazy trope for evilness. Yeah. And this is why I think if the Facemaker ever gets made into a movie, it could be really powerful to show these men as the heroes of their story, and that, you know, it is hard to look at a disfigured face. And I did struggle, you know, with, you know, what do I include? What do I not include? I really made the decision to only include photos of the men whose stories I told. So it wasn't just like medical voyeurism. And there's an exception though. If they die in Gillies' care, I only include a pre-injury photo and then a surgical diagram of what Gillies had hoped to achieve. But yeah, my editor was like, I don't know, it's so graphic. And I said, we have to look at their faces. That's the whole point, is that these men were hidden and people just did not want to look at them, and it destroyed their lives. And I did one of these live chats as well. And somebody, this was in Britain, and somebody said, my grandfather was disfigured and was operated on Gillies, but it didn't go well. And he really lived a life of isolation. And I said, I'm really glad that you shared that, because it's easy to look at the cases where he's successful and, you know, it's a happy ending, but a lot of men just never were able to get over the psychological scarring of it. And also, because the reconstruction would take years, a lot of men just didn't want to go through the pain of it. So they gave up, and they would maybe wear the prosthetic. And they did live kind of miserably and isolated because people weren't able to accept their appearance. And I said that the irony of Harold Gillies is that he births this entire discipline, which is plastic surgery, and we've all become hyper aware of how we look as a result of this. But he really was just trying to help these men blend back into society, so they would be accepted. So that's kind of the irony of the Facemaker. But told you, I gotta keep cross plugging my books. You know, we're running out of time. So
no, it was a great, and also it was a backlist book. So whenever we do chat for the podcast, we're gonna have to be talking about both, because
we definitely
we gotta talk about both of them, and then we will of course be talking about Sleuthhound, which I'm so excited for. I want to finish this up with kind of something that we have been talking about periodically throughout the discussion, but I really want to talk about Lister's legacy and clearly the profound impact that that's had, and we are still feeling that today. And just to blanket ask, you know, how do you think history should remember him? Kim, do you have any thoughts on that?
I just think that thinking out of the box isn't necessarily a bad thing. If he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have the advances we, you know, in the field that we did. So I think it's okay to go outside the norm a little bit, you know, be a little different, do something in the way, you know, yeah. That's how I like to remember him. It's just out of box thinking is okay.
Yeah, that's a really good take home, I think, from this. You know, you got to be open. And what you know today isn't what we're going to know tomorrow necessarily. That medicine is always evolving. And that's kind of what Dead Ends, sorry, cross promoting again, but that's kind of what the next kids book is about, is really that kind of idea that, you know, it's okay to fail and it's okay to be wrong. And oftentimes the ways that we are wrong will inform how we ultimately get to the right place. And you know, there's a guy named Semmelweis that a lot of people cite to me. He got everybody to wash their hands in the 19th century before Lister. They called him the hand washer, and they put him in an insane asylum, and he died. And it's like this is crazy story, right? And nobody believed Semmelweis. And so people always cite that to me, and I said that's true. And he was before Lister, and he was right, but he still didn't understand germ theory. So really, until you get Lister coming along and explaining why washing hands is important, it's very difficult to convince people to wash their hands. So it takes a beat, and you really have to be open. And the way that Lister changes minds, he goes to the younger generation and he changes their minds, and that's very important to what ultimately happens. He kind of goes, well, I can't change the older establishment. I'm going to start with the younger surgeons, and they become the Listerians. They call themselves the Listerians. They go out and they spread the gospel. And that's really how that kind of slow change happens.
Alyssa, what about you?
I might get on my educational soapbox for 2 seconds. No, because for me, Lister's legacy is kind of like what Lindsey and Kimberly were both saying, is like this legacy of innovation and failure. And something I've noticed in my decade that I've been an educator, is that children and young adults at this point, like my boomer opinion is that like kids don't have problem solving skills anymore because no one makes them solve problems anymore.
Yeah.
And I think like having a legacy of someone like this that you can show to people and say, look, this is a person who saw a problem, tried to solve it, failed a few times, but ultimately did it, is like, will help people understand like, oh, I can do that too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's about having the courage to fail, which is something that, you know, in an age of perfection, I always say, like, can you imagine if YouTube was around when Mozart was around? Like, I always like picture him like putting up like this amazing piece of music and people are like, thumbs down, you know, like terrible, right? People don't realize like the creative process, like even as a writer, you know, like I say, I look back on the butchering art and all I can see is what's wrong with it. But that's all part of that creative process. Like you're learning and you're growing and you have to not be afraid to put yourself out there, which is terrifying in the age of social media. Let's face it. And I really feel for kids, especially on social media, because it's difficult. Like when I did the TV show and stuff, people like will like seek out your email address and send you just the worst stuff. Like, oh, you wear too much makeup, or you don't wear enough makeup, or you should, I mean, just like, but it's always like stuff about, and actually it's a lot of women who are like commenting on my body or my appearance and stuff. They feel like you're on TV, they own you on some level. And it's like, it's a very weird, but I remember there was this old doctor, like he's still practicing, and he wrote me just the most atrocious email. And I actually wrote it back, which I shouldn't have done. And I said, I hope that you don't have daughters, you know. And he was like, I do, and they're not like you. But the crazy thing was, he was like a boomer who clearly doesn't know how social media works, because like all of his details, like his doctor's practice was listed on. I didn't do anything, but I could have easily just like gone on Instagram and like posted this stuff, and people would have been so angry. And I just thought, you're so like, why would you send to feel so entitled to be able to talk to somebody that you don't know like that is so crazy. But the other thing about the TV show was I wasn't like writing that show. I was just hosting it. And people must have thought, people actually come to me and they're like, can you help solve this crime? And I'm like, no. I was like, I am definitely not qualified. Like I'm a professional silly person. Like, please don't, you know, think that I can go and solve like some kind of murder case for you. So it's weird how people like absorb that through TV.
Yeah. Some of the emails that Maria Smilios gets too, she shares some on social. Some of them are
I know, they're really bad. I think like, you know, it's just we're so contactable now. And you know, part of being a writer for me, unfortunately, is like I'm chronically online. Who I am though online is very different to, you know, if you just went out for a drink with me or whatever. But people, they don't get that. And like, you know, I will say something maybe political every once in a while, and people are like, stay in your lane. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm not allowed to have a political opinion, apparently. You know, people, what happened to you? You were just, I mean, I don't know if people even admit this stuff anymore, but I went on to Rogan in 2018, I think it was. And, you know, so a lot of people found me through his podcast. So they have strong opinions about, you know, the world and politics today. And so if I kind of like emerge with like an opinion, you know, people will get, you know, quite hostile and angry. Even when I got vaccinated, and I wrote a post about it because I was vaccinated on the anniversary of the first ever vaccine, which was the Jenner vaccine. And I thought that was so cool. I got called up.
That is cool.
I didn't plan it that way, and I got it. And I put up this big thing about Jenner and smallpox vaccine, and people were like, you know, you took that vaccine. And so it's hard being a content creator because everybody's got an opinion and everybody feels entitled to put that opinion online. So yeah, I know it's hard. People don't realize. And like, you think, oh, we shouldn't read the comments and we shouldn't engage, but it can be hard because you put your heart into your work. And you know, so I when you said, oh, we don't really like authors engaging, I've been like engaging on all of your posts. I'm sorry. I was excited to see the butchering art being featured. So
we love that. No, it's just sometimes, you know, sometimes if there's a negative review, you know, authors, I guess, also have a right to defend themselves. But there has been a couple times in the past. No, we appreciate it. I always welcome authors.
I mean, it's hard
totally
to hear
gushing,
negative stuff,
please.
but like I totally like I probably would give this book like 3 stars like, now because now I see like what I could have done and where the pacing maybe could have been. And, like, so you learn as a writer, like it was my first book, and also when I wrote it, you know, I was going through such a tough time, and I didn't actually think about what like academic, you know, I have a PhD in from Oxford, and I have a very academic background, but these days I call myself a storyteller. And a lot of academic historians do not like that, right? And so they all have very, you know, big opinions about what I do. I say I'm like the P.T. Barnum of medical history. Like I'm out there, you know, roll up. I'm going to tell you about this. But I always say that just like Indiana Jones brought people into archaeology, like it's like a gateway drug, right? Like you pick up the butchering art. It's not going to be, you know, the full nuanced story of antisepsis because it can't be for a commercial book. But it will get people in, and then hopefully it will inspire people to go deeper. And that's what I try to do. But you know, academic writing is a different skill, and it's a great skill. And a lot of academic historians do wonderful jobs. It's just not for me. I've always been kind of a storyteller, and I like to kind of find that the beating heart of something that gets people interested. So.
I love that. And I do see Tom's question. We'll get back to that in just a second. I did just accidentally scratch my leg and made it bleed, which is making me think of all the ways I would have died if this was, you know, 18.
I like Cam's comment. Lindsay, don't talk about my friend's book like that at 3. It's probably gonna like get cut into like people like cut just me saying I would give my book a 3, but you know what I mean? Like you look back and it's hard. You just, I think most writers look back at their books and go, oh, I should have done this, or
I totally would.
Yeah. You just, it's time and space away from it, and you start to grow as a writer, and you just see things differently. And again, I can see this is why Eric Larson says I never go back, because you don't really want to even see it, you know. But
Leanne's comment, well, there goes your whole leg.
Yeah, right. I know. I don't even know what it is. I think it's just like a scratch from the cat or something, and I accidentally, I guess, scratched the scab off, and I cannot get it to stop bleeding.
Well, that's the 19th century operating theory.
All right, Lindsay is now the owner of Morbidly. I know. So, Tam, how do you think history should remember Lister?
I just think that like we should remember him as the hero he is, because like he saved countless lives, because like medicine would not be where it is today without him, obviously, and that just goes to show that you don't have to be like a superhero with super strength to like, you know, make a really big impact in the world. So
I like that.
Just a microscope, you know, helped him. So
I'm trying to pitch this as a movie, and we came up with a tagline. I showed it.
Really? That's so cool.
Well, so we recut the trailer down to a minute, and the tagline is something like, "A surgeon with a germ of an idea changed the world." And that's like, you know, the guts of it. But I mean, convincing Hollywood of anything that's not a remake these days is really difficult. But I still think it's a story for our times. You know, here's this guy, nobody's believing him. We've all just come through a pandemic ourselves. It's such a visual world. Do you remember? The Gangs of New York. Do you guys remember that movie?
Oh yeah.
Brilliant, right? And a lot of people think of the Victorians as like black and kind of stuffy, but actually the Gangs of New York captures that early Victorian period brilliantly, like a really, really loud colors and patterns, kind of dirty. And then Victoria obviously plunges everybody into mourning, but in that earlier period, you really get that kind of craziness. And so I kind of thought for the movie, you have that. And Lister's in black, you know, he's Quaker, so he dresses very soberly. And as the movie progresses, everything gets a bit cleaner. And people start dressing a little bit in the operating room, they're dressing. So it's kind of like a visual signal that Lister's getting through. But I just think it would be such a fun movie to kind of bring people into this world that they've never really thought about. You know, we think about the 19th century a lot, like Bridgerton, you know, like all these like shows that are in the 19th century, but like this is like a way into a story, into that period that I think people just don't consider. Like what would happen if you got like a toothache or you needed a leg amputated or something, you know, sorry to mention teeth again, Patches. But you know, I always think of teeth in the past because there was like just nothing, you know, that you could do. And you know, you get the dentures made out of dead men's teeth, and like it's just like an awful time for dentistry. But yeah, I think that it's a story for our times because you can really take a lot away about perseverance and believing in yourself and the courage to fail. And I think Lister embodies all that. I just want to lastly say that when I got divorced, I had to move out of my flat and I had to move to a cheaper part of London. And I ended up moving to North London, and I moved very close to where Lister is buried. And he's buried in this very unassuming graveyard. Nobody goes and visits his grave. It's very plain because he was a Quaker. And I would go and I would, sit there and not talk to him, but I would just go and visit the grave. And I told this story to a reporter in Scotland, and the headline was something like, "Heartbroken historian sits on Lister's grave and writes his story." And I was like, whatever sells the book. But
Yeah, right.
but it was lovely to be able to do that. I don't live in London anymore, but if you ever get to London, Google where he's buried. It's a very unassuming grave. And he could have been buried in Westminster. He was a hero at the time that he died. He was very famous, but he didn't want that for himself. And so he's really kind of buried in this very unassuming grave, and he's like tucked away in a corner. You would never know he was buried there with Agnes. So
right. Thank you guys so much for your participation. I've absolutely loved this discussion. I kind of wanted to end on the note because a lot of people are highlighting Tom's question here, which I would love for you to answer and send us on our way. Lindsey, thank you so much for hanging out with us. But let's talk about, a rare example of an uncomplicatedly positive legacy, because I feel like, unfortunately,
that's very true. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were things though about Lister, like he didn't believe that women should be in medicine. He was very kind of anti-women entering as doctors. Interestingly, Joseph Bell, who my next book about is opposite of that. So this is a debate that's going on at the same time, and Bell is very much open, and he helps revolutionize surgery. So there are things about Lister that are very like Victorian and not something that we would want to see in our quote hero today. I have to say Harold Gillies really was interesting because Gillies not only, did all this amazing work on these disfigured soldiers, and he had a great big personality as well, but he does the first phalloplasty on a trans man in the 1940s. A lot of people don't realize that the surgery was happening that early. It's on a trans man named Michael Dillon. Michael Dillon is outed by the British press eventually, and he's driven from Britain. It's really awful. There's a media circus, but Gillies really stands behind him. And so this is kind of another extraordinary, to me, uncomplicated hero. You can look at Gillies and say like he was doing something very progressive for the period. And so, but yeah, with Lister, it is uncomplicated in a sense, but like I said, there's still those kind of like Victorian, like I think he would have been quite shocked that me, a woman, had written this book about him. I wonder what he would have thought about that. But that said, I did get the sense that Agnes was very, much seen as an intellectual partner. So there was that, but he did definitely think that women shouldn't be entering medicine per se. And that was a huge debate that was going on in the mid to late 19th century.
Woof.
Well, dang.
Sorry, guys. But isn't that shocking? It's not really like that shocking, like a Victorian guy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've learned nothing because.
No, I mean, and actually with Bell, like that's been really interesting to me because there was some women who were admitted to the medical school, and there's a big uproar about this, and they're prevented from taking their exams. And Bell really kind of steps forward and treats them just like the men. And he is just as critical of them in that sense. Like he didn't give them any kind of cushy instruction. So he's kind of extraordinary in that sense. But there were few real Victorian men who thought that at the time. But when you get the Florence Nightingale revolution and you get women taking on more medical roles, I think it becomes easier for women to enter medicine in that sense too. So, but I have an idea for my next book after Sleuthhound. I can't tell you now, but it is about a woman. I'm gonna be going in a different direction, and I'm really excited about it. We'll see if my publisher buys it, but yeah, I do want to try to go a little sideways and tell a slightly different kind of story for the next one. After Sleuthhound, which has to be finished, and oh my God, will it ever be finished? As I am stuck in Chicago right now, guys. So.
Well, thank you so much, everybody singing praises. Thank you for coming, Lindsey. And
thank you guys, everybody. The distraction has been great. Thank you to all my friends from around the world who showed up tonight. You guys are great. And yeah, so it's been wonderful to meet you all.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to poke you to get some of these other people on the podcast for sure.
Oh yeah, I'll get them in. I'll wrangle them. I'm P.T. Barnum. I got the circus.
Yes.
But yeah, so many talented people, and definitely check out Conjurer's Kitchen. Annabelle's cakes are brilliant. She is so talented, and they're gruesome and weird and surreal, and I just love her to death. She's out in LA, so feel very lucky to know so many talented people out there. So
yes, and thank you, Kim, Alyssa, Tam. I always appreciate you. Rachel, I am so sorry. I know I think you're out there watching us. I saw you comment a couple times. I'm absolutely crushed we couldn't hear you. I don't know what happened.
Rainbow cone.
It's seriously
sorry, somebody said get a rainbow cone if you're in Chicago. I gotta look that up.
Oh okay. yeah, go get a rainbow cone.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is. I feel so un-Chicago right now. Like I grew up here, but I haven't lived here for so long, so I'll have to check that out.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Next month, our August book, we are going to be reading Briefly Perfectly Human by Aliwa Arthur, who is a death doula. This is making an authentic life by getting real with the end, or about the end, excuse me. And I have already spoken to Aliwa. We've had her on the podcast. She's just so her presence alone, just like, she's fantastic. I'm so excited for you guys to hear that episode. If you don't follow her, follow her on socials because she films a lot of great videos, but also follow her death doula company, Going with Grace. I can, it's 5 flavors from the South Side. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Good to know.
Right. Yeah, I know. I like these tips. So
also coming very, very soon, I've already gotten some questions because we're halfway through the year, what our 2026 lineup is going to look like, because you guys know that I already have that completed and I'm working on 2027 because I'm crazy. I am soon going to be releasing some fun emoji hint pictures for you guys, but if you are a Patreon pal, I have released the list already, so if you guys would like to join over there, you can go see it. Super fun. I'm so excited. We've talked about a couple things that are going to show up next year, speaking of axes and surgery tools and stuff like that, so keep an eye out. But thank you so much. If you guys don't mind hanging out while I end the live, and then we will all go on our ways. And if you guys are a Patreon member, I'll see you in about 15 minutes to discuss a very strange book that I forced you guys to read, so I was not alone in reading this weird book.
Thank you guys. Thanks everybody. Wayne, Kythra, I see you all out there, so thanks for joining.
Yes, I love this. Ida Portello's, yes. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it, and we will see you in a month. And go join a chapter if you'd like to.
Oh, lost her.
And then I froze. You know what? I'm just gonna end it. It clearly wants me to shut up. Okay, bye guys.